Hello and welcome to episode 28 of Cybeats Powerhouse Perspectives. My name is Chris Blask. I'm the Vice President of Strategy at Cybeats. And with me today is Mr. Nathan DiNiro. Nathan, how the heck are you?
I'm fabulous. Thanks for asking. How are you doing today?
I'm good. We talk a lot about infrastructure and so forth. And if anybody can pick up the heartbeat in the background, that's infrastructure. That's the High Line rail bridge over O'Galley River being pounded into the sediment as we speak.
Fantastic. Now we know to point the satellites to find you.
Right? I'm not that hard to find. And I back in the early internet days, early 90s, I noticed everybody on the internet had a handle. Everybody had a handle, right? And I'm just the kind of idiot, my secret handle was Chris Blask, all lowercase, no spaces. So I kind of assume that anybody who's a real threat can figure out who I am and where I am, right? So
yeah, I'm kind of the same way. I mean, I don't worry about it too much, and I figure just being radically open makes it easier to cover your butt in some other ways.
Right. They enough energy required by everything else, which takes us right into our topic right now. So you and I spent a lot of time in the early D-bomb days. The attestation ecosystem, digital bill of materials, out there on GitHub, open source by Unisys, and this, as we were saying right before in the green room, right before the recording here, it's interesting that as of this week, and it's only Tuesday, attestations and the definitions thereof, have been a hot topic in, some of the more important supply chain meetings going on right now.
Mm-hmm.
And, I learned that the Trusted Computing Group has a station group that has a definition, that is one thing and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
And when you and I started talking about this, the word attest, big fan of it, right? I'm Chris Blask. I'm saying this right now. But that being an attestation, which is a perfectly logical word, hadn't really gotten involved in conversation with me much before that at all. And I've seen the same pause, since about the time you and I started getting, working on it and so forth, and you're explaining what you're doing to people, and you have to repeat the word attestation, attestation. Okay, I see. And now here we are, say 3 years later, and it's becoming a thing, right? So as we're doing this, right? Well, it's perhaps an inevitability. If we're going down this path, we have no choices, whether we want to or not. Now is the time to talk about attestations.
Mm-hmm.
And in the show, we always try to go back, look at the history through your eyes, where we are right now, and then try to guess the future, right?
Right.
So, Anthony, if you roll that first one, can you attest to the importance of attestations in your career? Whatever that means to you.
Oh, you can't see my hand, but I'm raising my right hand, and yeah, I can absolutely attest to the importance of attestation in my career. I mean, it's interesting because I'm kind of a one of the self-taught people. And I'm kind of an autodidact and a polymath, and I pick up on things pretty easily. Generally, I'm not a physicist, I'm not like a PhD or anything like that, but I kind of can get these things, right? So, and I started out my career very young, before I got out of high school, I was doing technology stuff, and I grew up during a period where in the 80s, people that were had English degrees or had just random degrees were managing technology in companies sometimes often. And I got to see the sort of transformation at that time because I was early in my career, between sort of the old big iron, SNA token ring, IBM's coming in and, those sort of systems to this revolution of the PC. And that pushed the market for talent in a lot of directions, right? So the thing that this comes down to, my long-winded story, is A+ certification. You remember A+ certification, right? Like, hiring managers had no way to tell whether you could do anything, right? Because universities don't teach IT support. Universities had their own struggles with their own IT support. So, that was the thing that kind of dawned on me earlier. And then I would say, fast forward to about 20 years ago when I got into healthcare. And then when I got into meaningful use and sort of this health transformation in Obamacare, a lot of the technology that was coming into healthcare was expensive, and they were providing providers in the system a way of being able to offset if they were to attest to meeting certain requirements, right? And attestation is a legal term, right? Most people don't use it because it's used in legal documents in courtrooms and lots of things that most people don't read, right? Agreements and stuff like that they might sign off on. But I think if you're a doctor or a professional or you know, a CPA or something like that, you're probably more familiar with it. So, you know, I think that's interesting as you point out, like in the normie world, you know, it's not necessarily a thing, but I think that there's a section of the world, industry, law, finance, that understands what that means when you say it. But maybe not. I'm just making an assumption, right?
Well, you know, it's interesting inside Unisys. I talked to one of the folks, you know, had been there many, many years, very, very interesting guy. And he's the one who said that, you know, in the first day or two of DBOM. And he's like, what you're talking about is an attestation system. It's like, oh, yeah, that's right. And it resonates so much with my views on these sort of things, as we talk about in this series, you know, all the time. You know, yes, you know, we're talking about software bill of materials, we're talking about supply chain security, but we're really talking about is transparency and clarity. You know, I'm going to do business with you. We're going to come up with the terms, and I'm going to not just comply with them. I will remove the hassle and overhead of you wondering whether or not I'm complying with them.
Governing a process.
I will, in fact, I will attest to it. You know,
yeah,
whatever it is. You know, you're my customer, and I'm your supplier. If I meet your requirements, I want you to know. You know, I said I'd do it. Here it is. Here's me doing it. Here's me doing it the way you said we're doing it. And I want to make that easy for you so that, you know, you can say, oh, yeah, you're going through your life. I'm not the biggest thing in your world. You know, hopefully, you know, mostly you're doing other business to generate the revenue to pay me.
Well, you have other customers relying on you, relying on me, servicing you too. So it's
right.
You know.
So what I find is that a lot of transparency gets lost. Like, you can find it if you have the time, and you don't. You know, there's an email that was sent, there was a text message or an SMS or a Facebook, you know, messenger or something where they said, you know, hey, you know, Nate, I really did do that thing. And I want to put it all together in one place, not only so you can find it, so that you can not worry about not finding it. And which gets into the second question, right? You know, how definitive is the information decision makers act on today? And let me explain that, right? Because I think the more I've looked at this last couple of years, you know, I look at explicit and implicit attestations. That implicit attestation is like, hey, you work for a reliable company. We've done business for years. We agreed on terms. The lawyers, somewhere there's a document. And I'm kind of assuming that, you know, if I asked, you know,
is that trust but verify?
Right. Or do I actually know? And I will poison the answer, because I think that most business decision makers are acting on implicit attestations. Just there isn't really definitive information. Right? Or am I just being cynical there?
No, I absolutely agree. As a matter of fact, I'm dealing with a billing issue right now because of that specific sort of condition where, you know, you implicitly rely on something, and you should probably have it be more explicit. And, you know, that is a lot of fraud, waste, and abuse and inefficiency happens in business and supply chains because of all these things, right?
Well, and you know, so much of it, you know, I don't know the numbers. It'd be interesting but I would guess that the actual losses to fraud and abuse, you know, isn't dramatically more than the lost business opportunity, the expenses on trying to reduce fraud and abuse. So because it's a problem, we have to deal with it. It limits our actions, and we have the costs. So we're paying.
I bet it depends on the industry for sure. But, you know, I agree with the fact that, well, and it's funny, when you presented the question, and knowing the technology that DBOM sits on top of, which is, you know, essentially blockchain technology, and blockchains rely on consensus mechanisms. I mean, that's literally what we're talking about is you know, how do decision makers make decisions? And if we're making them based on these implicit ideas, it's probably because it's very expensive to have more explicit ideas. So if we can reduce the transaction cost on the attestations and or assertions and or records, you know, whatever they are, however they're stored, then it should keep everyone more honest, and to also reduce a lot of the friction and expense in maintaining and governing these things, right?
Right.
I think that's the idea.
Right, and expense, right? So we were supposed to record this on Friday. We had technical problems, so we're doing this on Tuesday afternoon. And coincidentally, right after Anthony and I just did a panel with Fred Cohen and Win Schwartau and Mark Carney on the economics of SBOM. So trying to talk that through. Is it love security, really do care? However, when what I want people to do to make them more secure also lowers their costs, increases their productivity and so forth, I don't have to try so hard to get them to do it.
Well, but it increases their accountability as well. So that's the other side that you're working against, right? I mean, I've worked across all kinds of industries throughout the last 40 years that have accountability regimes that they've had to implement, from restaurants, right? In the 80s, where the IRS decided they wanted to know more about how people's tips were earned and how much they were earning and all that sort of stuff, or keeping track of it for tax purposes, or medicines and supply chains of opiates and opioids, right? Or other controlled substances, right? It's all kinds of things, right? Down to the aircraft part in the plane you're flying in, or the risk, right?
And this, we have a lot of fun, putting together these questions, right? Thinking about thinking about these interesting folks that come and talk all this stuff with me and with us and all of us here. And I like, after 28 episodes we've been doing, personally, I like this. Let's look back. Let's see where we are. Let's look out in the future. I personally, and we as a company, we're betting, that there are financial benefits and economic benefits for our customers to do these things. Therefore we will invest, we'll hire people, we'll write code, we'll the time, not 3 years ago, not 3 years from now. And that's because looking forward, Anthony, if you could roll that last long, complex question we put together, preach, right? Is that really where we're going? Is there more benefit in being clear and being accurate and being honest? You talk about, being held accountable. If you're screwing up, you don't want to be held accountable. But I would posit that if you're screwing up, you've got other problems, right? Effective companies really want to preach. Here's where we are.
Yeah, I mean, if I was doing anything, I wouldn't want to screw up, right? I mean, that's important for my reputation. It's important for my customers, depending upon whatever it is I'm providing, right? Depending on the risk scale of what this solution or thing fits, right? So I think, I'm certainly very bullish on this because I've been in the space. I helped to design the supply chain provenance system for a country, for its agricultural supplies and for its medicines. I'm working with some other projects that are trying to introduce the concept of mass balance into agriculture and into markets where instead of having carbon markets and cap and trade systems, they have carbon markets based on commodities with the carbon sequestered in the commodity. And if they can make sure that you're paying for a ton of a commodity and you're getting a ton of the commodity, then they know how much carbon is in that, because they now have ways of capturing attestations from our sensors all over the planet and inputs on a farm and whatnot, and they can tell because they know the science behind what any given crop can, how much carbon it pulls out of the air, right? So that's the agriculture industry heretofore was very much focused on, well, the apple that I take out needs to be the apple that you get, that you're buying, because of food quality and all kinds of reasons like that. But introducing this idea of mass balance, where we can take a commodity and attach the carbon cost to it, and then use renewable sources for generating and handling the transactions on these things to reduce friction of money flowing back for the goods through the supply chain, and potentially incentivizing people to pay with sustainably produced value, right? So let's say, for instance, you could sustainably produce Bitcoin, for instance. You could pay for a supply chain commodity, let's say, that had, let's say, a 9% premium on it, because 9% of the weight of this product was carbon, essentially, right? So you're paying for the carbon, you have a way of accounting for it, and you have potentially a way of incentivizing people to pay in a way that is sustainable for the goods. that's kind of a future idea that we're talking about. I mean, certainly this commodity contract is a real thing, but I see D-bombs and S-bombs being an important part of maintaining attestations around the inputs and the outputs that aren't captured by other parts of the system. Information that's captured within a complex system like that to be able to create a market product and maintain everyone's trust in the market, that's the sanctity of the market, and that's been one of the problems with carbon markets, is that there's not a lot of transparency in the markets, and it's difficult to price the commodity. It's a lot different when, as we're talking about here, you have attestations around the data, as well as the behaviors, as well as the maintenance records, and whatever other things are involved in expending carbon to produce these or move these goods, right? So it's like, that's the stuff that I'm super interested in, and it seems like it's 20 years away, but it's really it's accelerating, and it's coming a lot faster.
I agree. And it's again, as I said, it's fascinating that just the set of conversations I've had today and how they all differ from the ones I had a year ago and 2 years ago and 3 years ago. Certain things are happening. This whole S-bomb thing is, a lot of people, as they're edging themselves into, they're saying, well, the U.S. government's requiring it. It's like, yeah, kind of. That's kind of part of it. And all the security is really important.
It used to require ADA too.
But right. But when you look at it in these sort of ways, compared to, do you know where you put all that money, all that stuff you got? How much does it cost you to go back and look at it? That's when I see fundamental changes.
Traceability.
Business. Traceability, right?
I mean, that was the big driver for this other project I work on, the supply chain provenance system, right? They needed traceability, and this supply chain provenance system existed to essentially reduce the friction on supply chain finance payments and make it easier for smallholder farms to get their produce to market. Because of the friction and barriers there. So, yeah, I mean, it's there's just so much going on in the space, and it's all happening so quickly. It's really hard to keep up on in a lot of ways.
Well, it's I find it hard just to keep up having these conversations, right? And I'm gonna, but for the record, I'm wrapping here, so I don't start again. But there are so many. I think I've even said it on these shows, right? Samuel Coleridge apparently was the last person who read all the English words ever written, and you can't. There's too much since then. And I think what's defining the time we're in right now is that I don't care who you are, you cannot keep up on your own narrow discipline. Is moving too fast. And all we're talking about here, I think, is another one of these, so many forcing functions, just don't have time, not to be transparent, right? It's just, how much, trust is everything in business, and functional relationships. And we don't have time to mess about.
Right.
Here's a deal. Here's agreement. Here's me doing it. Are you doing it? Yes, you're doing it. Thank you. Let's spend the time we have actually progressing forward, because things are evolving too fast.
That's your reduction in transaction costs, right?
Right.
That's it.
So, all right. Well, thank you, Nate. Again, as always, pleasure knowing you. Thanks for your time.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate you having me on, and just stay safe.
I'll do the very least I can. Thank you, everyone, for coming out. We'll talk to you again next week.